Natural Habitat Adventures is pleased to be bringing you this webinar today. We are here to talk about the Tanzania migration experience. And your presenter today is Joe Charlson. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about Joe before I turn it over to him. Along with his wife, Jillian, Joe manages natural habitat safaris from Kenya, where he divides his time between Nairobi, the Leshwa camp, and the bush when he's out on safari. Joe was born in 1975 in northern England and at the age of 10 moved with his parents to Kenya, where his lifetime of adventuring in Africa began. Joe received a degree in biological sciences from Bristol University in 1997. And since graduating, Joe has guided safaris and worked at some of the most prestigious camps in Africa, such as Jack's Camp in Botswana, Cotter's 1920 Camp in Masai Mara, and the original Curran Downey Safaris. 2012 marked the next big step in the evolution of Joe's safari-based career path with the advent of his and Jillian's partnership with Natural Habitat Safaris. And so we're delighted to have Joe here with us today to talk about this amazing experience in Tanzania. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you very much for that very kind welcome. So welcome everybody on behalf of Natural Habitat and WWF. As mentioned, I'm going to chat to you today about one of the most amazing wildlife spectacles in the world, the Great Wildebeest Migration, and specifically on this spectacle in Tanzania. This is one of our finest safaris, and it's based in the Serengeti, which is marked on the map here. It's one of Tanzania's most iconic wildlife areas, and the name Serengeti is derived from the Maasai word meaning endless plain. It's a part of a larger ecosystem, which includes the Masai Mara up in Kenya and surrounding conservancies and protected land. So the entire ecosystem covers over 25,000 square kilometers. And it's, of course, famed for being the backdrop for the Great Wildebeest Migration. Now, the migration is a constant movement of wildebeest and other large herbivores within the Mara Serengeti ecosystem. And several of our safaris track the path of these wildebeest, and this Tanzania migration safari focuses specifically on the time when the wildebeest are down in the southern Serengeti between December and March each year. During the rest of the year, they're moving in a almost clockwise direction up through towards the Masai Mara, crossing over into Kenya between July and October, and then working their way back down to hit the shortgrass plains in November and December time. So what is it that makes the migration one of the greatest wildlife spectacles on Earth? Really, it's all about the numbers. There's about 1.3 million wildebeest, 600,000 zebra, and a host of other animals just on a constant trek, always in search of fresh grazing, water to drink. It is an absolutely amazing spectacle. And our safaris aim to put you right in the midst of all this action amongst these animals. Wildebeest, as we mentioned before, are constantly moving, and this has enabled them to have these enormous herds. And an individual wildebeest might actually trek over several thousand kilometers during the course of an entire year, following this age-old migration pathway, and it's just constantly moving, always on the go. And what I'd like to do is take you through some of the actual specifics of where they're going to be and what's happening at this particular time of year when we're focusing on the migration. So there's a bit of an overview for our safari. In March, these safaris last 8 days or 7 nights. Our migration trips, as with all Nat Hab trips, are for small groups, a maximum of 14 guests, and we have 5 guests in each of our safari vehicles. All of our safaris are guided by exceptional expedition leaders, and Pietro Larashi and Andrew Corbett have been picked to lead these ones, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them later on. And we try and do this safari in a very traditional way, under canvas, in tents, and we have our own migration base camp. That's a traditional mobile camp that follows the wildebeest migration around the Serengeti, and we have it down in the southern Serengeti at this part of the year. So in December, the herds are still moving south. They're sort of galloping down across the eastern side of the Serengeti, heading towards the shortgrass plains at the bottom. And the area they're going for is very, very big, wide open spaces under the shadow of the Ngorongoro Highlands, and as a backdrop for that. So they're moving down, and then they start to get into the area in December into January. There's lots of predators that are down there that have been eagerly waiting their arrival. And these wildebeest, as you can see in this image here, a heavily pregnant one being chased by an ambitious cheetah. But it is fraught with danger for them down there. And the reason that they've come to this part of the Serengeti is in order to calve. Between the end of January and the latter weeks of February, several 100,000 calves are dropped onto the plains. Why they come down here is that the plains are a very, very good source of particular nutrients for them that come from the volcanic Ngorongoro Highlands nearby. And also because they are such big open plains, it's very easy for the mothers to be able to see when there's predators approaching. When the wildebeest are born, they have to be up and running very quickly. They're standing and walking within 5 minutes, and they can actually run with the herd within 10, not quite at full speed, but they really need to be, they really need to have that ability and get going, otherwise they're likely to get picked off. Unfortunately, a number of them and the other herbivores that are also moving with them don't make it. The young, the old, the injured are all picked off by scavengers and by predators and scavengers that are following the migration and just moving after the herds, picking these ones off. So they're staying down in this southern Serengeti area through this period as the youngsters are getting bigger and stronger, and eventually in April, once they've grazed down a lot of the grass that's there, once the water holes that are down in that are in that area of the Serengeti start to dry up, the herds begin to move off again. By this stage, the young have grown, they're a little bit stronger, they're able to make this journey, and they start heading north and west in search of fresh grazing opportunities and more water to drink. Wildebeest need to drink every day, and so as these water holes dry off, they're forced then to move on. Now, the Serengeti is, of course, very well known for the migration. It is the iconic part of it, but it's not the only aspect, the only wildlife aspect to it. There are some other amazing wildlife to be seen there as well. The area has been labelled as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's home to all of the big mammal species that you find up in East Africa. And as well as being out and getting in amongst the wildebeest herds, we do concentrate on these other species as well, and putting our guests in positions and opportunities to witness some phenomenal action, and also to get some amazing photographs as well. So I've just got a few images that we've taken out on our trips. As I said, it's really about getting sort of up close and personal with these animals, and when you spend time in an area and you get to see different individuals, we can return to them day after day. You can actually learn a little bit about that individual, and you get a snapshot on its life for the time that we're there. The game drives that we do enable us to get close to animals. It's the best way for game viewing, and puts us in the best positions to get these amazing photographs out on our trips. Serengeti is, of course, home to the big five as well. That's elephant, buffalo, lion, leopard, and some rhinoceros as well. And we'll be taking in all these animals on our safaris, our guides taking pleasure in really explaining all of this to you in detail and interpreting the behavior that we're seeing when we're there. Sometimes it's just seeing animals on the move, be they buffalo or wildebeest. Other times we're seeing the end results of a kill that's happened, a leopard up a tree with a Thompson's gazelle. We're even up close and personal with the biggest predator that we have in East Africa, the lion there. And that's one wildebeest that didn't make it and isn't going to be migrating any further. So our Great Migration Safari, just take you through the itinerary, so just in a bit of detail now. It all starts and finishes in Arusha in Tanzania at Kilimanjaro International Airport. On the first day our guests will come in, and then we have a welcome drink with the expedition leader and dinner, and then a night of accommodation at a very lovely guest house there. The following morning we drive across to the local airport and take a light aircraft flight across into the Serengeti, and we're staying in an area of the eastern Serengeti called Namiri Plains. From there we drive down south to the very southern tip of the Serengeti ecosystem, where our migration base camp has been moved and set up, have 3 more nights there, and then finally we drive up into the Ngorongoro highlands and around the crater rim and have lunch at one of the lovely coffee farms on the lower slopes before finally getting back into Arusha, freshening up for the departure home. You'll also see in the bottom left of the screen there's a little bit of detail on our photographic departures. 2 of the trips have been designated for this, and what we do is we have a slightly smaller group with fewer guests in each vehicle, and we spend a night longer at our migration base camp. Also use a slightly different accommodation in Arusha as well. So a little bit of detail on our safari accommodations. As I mentioned right at the beginning, when we're out in the bush we try and do it in a traditional way as possible, under canvas, and there is nothing more amazing than being there and hearing the sounds of the bush all around you. But our adventure does start in Arusha. Maitreya House is a lovely little guest house set in, it's got quite a rural setting, lots of little farms around and beautiful views across to Mount Meru. Very comfortable lodgings for us to start off our trip, to get to meet the expedition leader and just settle into life in East Africa. Our other option that we use on our photographic safaris is Arusha Coffee Lodge, which is set in amongst a coffee plantation within the city. From these starts we fly across into the Serengeti, and our first camp there is called the Namiri Plains. This is an area of the Serengeti that's only recently been opened up for tourism. It was before only really visited by the park rangers and some researchers from the Frankfurt Zoological Society who have been studying cheetah and lion there. It's a very comfortable camp, very nicely appointed, and the perfect starting point for our safaris. Just a photograph here to give you an idea of the sort of very comfortable bathroom facilities that are there as well. Whilst we're here at Namiri Plains, we're doing a lot of game driving through this area, and also have an opportunity to get out on foot and explore the Serengeti on a guided walk with the specialist walking guide who's there. As part of our stay as well, we like to invite in some of the researchers to come and join us for a meal, maybe for lunch or a cup of tea in the afternoon, just to give us a little bit of a heads up on what's going on, and help explain some of the work that they're doing in that part of the Serengeti. And from after 3 days in the Namiri Plains, in the sort of central eastern side of the Serengeti, we drive right down to the southern western area towards where our migration base camp has been set up. This is a completely mobile camp that's just brought in for the season whilst the wildebeest are down here. Everything gets packed away into lorries that can then be moved off, and as the wildebeest move north, camp gets packed up and we set up in the next areas afterwards. This is really the traditional way of doing a safari, but our tents are still very large, very well appointed, and very comfortable. The area where the camp is set is on the edge of a little acacia forest looking over the plains. It's a point where the wildebeest do come and actually drop their calves, so we can have that action right outside of the tent. And when you're lying in the tent or relaxing in the afternoon and you hear the murmur of the wildebeest out on the plains, it's an absolutely amazing, an amazing sound and an amazing feeling. The area is also very well known for wild dogs, which is an added bonus as well, and they are quite often found coming through this area preying on the young calves that have just been dropped. So, as I mentioned earlier on, the best game viewing opportunities are done from vehicles, and we have exceptional guides and exceptional vehicles to make your journey extremely comfortable. The expedition leaders who are leading these trips at this time of year are Pietro Larashi, pictured here. Pietro is originally from Italy. He's been working in Tanzania for several years. He's a specialist walking guide as well as being an excellent photographer. He trains the Tanzania National Park Authority guides, rangers as well, sorry, and in how to walk. So he's an absolute expert at that. He's traveled throughout the entire country, led safaris all the way through Serengeti and the rest of the country down to the Selous and Ruaha down in the south. And we're very, very lucky to have him on our trips. Also joining him as a guide is Andy Corbett, an expedition leader who's been working with natural habitat for several years up in Kenya as well as in Tanzania. Andy originally hails from Ireland, but East Africa has been home for him for almost 20 years now. He's a fantastic guide, well known to many of our guests, and those of you who may have traveled with him in Kenya before will now be lucky enough to also do the same again with him in Tanzania. Pietro and Andy are assisted by our excellent group of safari guides who are all Tanzanian, and they'll be assisting them through the trip, and especially when we've got several vehicles out. Our vehicles are all in communication with one another through radios, so if one of our vehicles finds a fantastic sighting, the guides are all able to ensure that everybody in the group can get up there and have those experiences as well. Vehicles are very rugged Toyota Land Cruisers, extremely good for off-road driving out in the bush, excellent viewing platforms. All of our guests on our trips have access to window seats and also roof hatches. You can see above the vehicle there is a little sunshade as well. We do spend a lot of time in these cars being out on safari. The longer you can stay out there, the more opportunity you have to you have to see things, and so just having that little bit of extra shade there is absolutely great. Life out on safari really follows the sort of the patterns of the animals as well. The most active times are in the early morning and the late evening when it's a little bit cooler, but there is action throughout the day. And our days on safari start with a cup of tea or coffee or whatever your beverage is delivered to your tent, and then there's just this grand anticipation of the day to come. We start off usually game driving. Game drives, the length of them will depend on where we are, how our expedition leaders and guides decide we should be moving and going, but we quite often will head out in the morning, 6 o'clock, carrying a picnic breakfast with us and just see where the action takes us. We'll be driving through the herds, stopping off at different predator sightings and things like that. It's whatever unfolds at any given time. There are other opportunities beyond just game driving. Both in the Itinerary Plains and from Migration Basecamp, we do have opportunities to walk in the bush. This is a fantastic way of being able to see some of the things that you might otherwise miss, have a look at some of the tracks and the signs, see some of the little insects and birds that you might not see from the vehicle. When we're down in the southern Serengeti, that part of the ecosystem is also the home to the Maasai pastoralist people, and they're able to impart some of their local knowledge onto our guests as well. There is also the opportunity to take a little bit more of a focus on the local community as well, and whilst we're down at Migration Basecamp, we visit some of the local villages, and this is done in a way that's very, very authentic and sensitive to their culture, and really gives our guests an opportunity to really get to know the individuals and get to understand the culture in detail. For those who would like to, there is the opportunity to have an adventure aloft. There are balloon safaris that take place over the Serengeti. These balloons take off at dawn, float over the vast herds for an hour or so, gives you an absolutely amazing perspective on things, and then when you drop down, there's a lovely champagne breakfast under a tree at the end, before you then continue on with your other activities for the day. And then at the end of every day on safari, once we've been out there enjoying all these amazing experiences, we do often like to stop for a little sundowner, an East African tradition. where we have a little cocktail sometimes overlooking the plains and the amazing game that's there. So this brings me to the end of the presentation on the Tanzanian Great Migration Safari. I believe I'll be taking some questions now, but I'd just like to thank you all for listening, and we look forward to welcoming you on safari to East Africa at some stage soon.
Well, thank you, Joe. That was an amazing presentation, and we had everyone's attention throughout, which is fantastic. Now that Joe has finished his presentation, we'd love to take your questions. So if you have any, please send them in through the question box, which is over on the right-hand side of the screen. And I will be reading those aloud, and we'll have a conversation with Joe around those questions. So, Joe, what time of year do you recommend that people should go on this sort of safari?
Well, this particular safari is focusing on the migration in the southern part of the Serengeti. At this stage in the migration, this is when the wildebeest calves are born, and that's really the highlight of the trip. It's getting down there around this period when the females are coming down and massing on these short grass plains, calves are dropped, and as guests are able to witness that, to see the trials and tribulations of the predators that are trying to get in to grab them. And then there we see as we progress through February and into March, we start to see the wildebeest calves developing and eventually being ready to move on. But the migration is going on all the way throughout the year. And at the other end of the year, when they're at the northern extreme of their migration, they're up in Kenya's Masai Mara, and between July and September every year, we run a series of Kenya migration safaris that focus on the migration when it's up in that part of the ecosystem.
Great, thank you. And are there packing considerations, luggage restrictions, anything like that to be mindful of as you're planning your trip?
There are some considerations that guests will need to take into account. Whenever a guest is coming on the safari, there's lots of comprehensive information that gets sent out in a pre-departure booklet for the guests. But one of the key things is that we are traveling in light aircraft to get across from Arusha into the middle of the Serengeti, and there are weight restrictions on those aircraft. For our photographic departures, in sort of appreciation of the additional photographic equipment that our photographers will be carrying with them, we do actually book some extra seats to allow us to have a little bit more weight allowance. Because normal weight allowance on the light aircraft flights is 33 pounds per guest going through in their luggage. But as I mentioned, all of the detail will be there within the pre-departure booklets.
All right, thank you. And what about people who might have special meal requests, such as kosher, vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free? You know, there's a lot of different dietary requirements people may have. How are those handled?
We can handle pretty much all dietary requirements as long as we're given that information in advance. And the more information guests can give us about their requirements and preferences, the easier it is for us to plan and the more comfortable we can make them on safari. In general, our meals on safari are of an exceptionally high standard. There will be a mixture of food, predominantly European-style food that guests will be familiar with, but we do also try local cuisine in various meals as well, just to experience some of that. Our safari chefs are absolutely amazing. What they can produce in a charcoal trunk oven out in the bush is phenomenal. Freshly baked bread every day, cakes, roasts, whatever it may be. I think that the only complaint I've ever had from guests coming out on safari is that there was just too much food for them, and they ended up putting on weight on their trip. So yeah, so I think our guests will be very well catered for in that regard.
Very good. And how many days are most of the safaris that you've discussed today?
So excuse me. This particular safari, the migration safari, is an 8-day, 7-night trip. So that's 1 night in Arusha at the start. There's 3 nights at the Miri Plains Camp in one part of the Serengeti, and then 3 nights at Migration Base Camp in a separate area. For our photographic departures, we've added, excuse me, we've added a fourth night at Migration Basecamp just to give guests the opportunity to witness the spectacle for one more day. There are opportunities for guests to extend their trips, and one of the extensions that we have is to actually then go on into the Ngorongoro crater. We pass by this and enjoy the amazing view over it on the way back to sorry, excuse me, on the way back to Arusha. But then we also have the chance for guests to spend an extra 2 days and then actually drive down into the crater as well. Safaris can also be extended before or afterwards in any way that guests might like, and our adventure specialists here at Natural Habitat can help guests with any questions they may have on that.
Oh, perfect. All right. Thank you. The photographic safari, how does that differ from the standard safari?
It differs in that we have fewer guests on the trip and fewer guests in each vehicle. So when we're out on safari, we will have only 3 guests per vehicle. This means that photographers have more room to spread out with their kit, and also that they're not crowding around trying to get photographs. In addition, we've extended the photographic departure by 1 day to give everybody a little bit more time in the Serengeti.
Okay. And I would imagine that there's a lot of, with camera equipment, sometimes you have to be, you have to be recharging batteries and things like that. Is that ever a problem as you're traveling through?
It's not a problem at all. We have power in all of the camps. Solar power is provided there, and there are charging points for batteries. All of our safari vehicles are also equipped with inverters that provide 240 volts power, and we have adapter plugs that will take American-style plugs as well. The standard in Tanzania is a British-style 3 square pin. Pretty much all camera equipment will accept a range of 100 to 240 volts. So guests have ample opportunity to bring to charge their equipment. There is some additional information on this in the pre-departure briefing booklets that we send out, which also advises guests to bring spare batteries, extra memory cards, and so forth.
Terrific. Thank you. Well, Joe, this has been so informative. I think we've answered all of the questions that we had. For those of you listening, we will also be supplying all of you with the replay for this, so you will be able to go back and reference it again and share with friends and family. So, Joe, I think we can wrap it up now. I'm going to turn it back over to you for closing comments.
Okay, well, thanks so much. I think I'd just like to close off by saying I've lived and worked out in Africa for 30 years now. The Mara Serengeti ecosystem is, I think, my favorite, just simply because of the density of wildlife that's there when the migration is moving through, but also the variety of wildlife that we see when we're on these safaris. Although we do put a strong focus on the migration and the wildebeest, the other game that is out there that we'll be witnessing and experiencing throughout this trip is quite amazing and quite mind-blowing. Out of all of the safaris that I do, I've found that the best photographic opportunities are afforded to us when we're out within this area, and the Serengeti is absolutely should be on every nature lover's list of places to go. So yes, we're looking forward to seeing, to meeting all of the guests when they're coming out on safari to come and witness the migration with us.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, for a great presentation, and thanks to all who were listening today. We appreciate having you here with us, and if you like this webinar and you want to learn more, we will have, of course, you can learn more on our website, but we'll also have another webinar coming up in a couple weeks, so if you like this format, we would welcome you back. So with that, we will say good day and conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everybody.